Thank you, Dr. Tajul Islam. It seems to me like covering one semester in one day, yeah? At least even for me, a lot of the materials being shared is not even something which I'm fully familiar with, especially the details of the hadith science and studies. Perhaps some are more familiar with it as well. Perhaps some have learned quite a lot of new things. Okay, I'm going to open up the first round of questions for response by Dr. Tajul.
Okay, I have two comments. Number one, doctor, actually, when I studied ulum al-hadith, actually, when there is a characteristics of the shurut, how do we accept hadith is sahih or not? So one of the main principles is that it must not contradict to the Quran. So if it is contradictory to the Quran, then it is rejected and automatically categorized as al-hadith al-mawdu'ah. And the problem is that even though the principles are very clearly, stating it that in the book, but surprisingly, what I can see the trend in the hadith school is that they are not critical to the matan of hadith, even though the principles itself is stated in the book, number one. And I want to ask you, why does that happen? Clearly, if the hadith, even though the sanad is sahih, but they are clearly told that to reject that hadith if it's contradictory to the Quran, but why they still accept that hadith as sahih, number one. Number two, I have a comment on how do I say this? Okay, the interpretation of hadith or how people extract verdict from the hadith is quite interesting because I want to tell you a story when this conversation happened between me and my friend when I said that why people are still forcing women to get married because there's a hadith specifically mentioned that women cannot be forced because there's one girl, one lady came to Aisha and then complained to the Prophet that she was forced by the father that to get married to the cousin. And at the end of the matan is that she mentioned to the Prophet that actually now I am okay with the marriage, but I want to tell all the women out there that the dads has no rights to force their daughters to get married. But the conclusion that my friend came with was that it's just merely nasiha. It's not something that is ilzami, that fathers cannot force daughters to get married based on the hadith that la nikaha illa biwali. The interpretation itself is very interesting, even though the content or the substance of the hadith is very explicit, or the matan is very explicit. So for me, this is where the prejudice, this is where the male bias came in. When the hadith is very explicitly mentioned that fathers cannot force, they still come with the conclusion that, oh, actually because the father is the wali, so they have the power to force, and that hadith they consider as merely nasiha. So please comment on that.
If the hadith goes against the Quran, why is it that ulama actually still accepting the hadith? I'm actually happy that you've used the hadith that needs to be used to highlight this, is la nikah illa bi wali. Well, in short, Abu Hanifa rejects that hadith, and this is one of the arguments against him, right? So why does he reject it? Is because he says it's against the Quran itself. La tukrihu fatayatikum ala al-bighan, the idea of ikrah for your slave girls, and obviously hurratu awla, right? The free woman has more priority or rights, if you like. So there are people who reject it. Will reject the hadith, but it's not per se because it goes against the Quran. It's more really because of madhab bias. My madhab says it's right. Look, years ago, I'll give you an anecdote, your anecdote. Marrying Jewish and Christian women, right, is is halal. It's there in the Quran, right? Surah Ma'idah. And I remember someone asked me, I was a witness to one of these weddings in England once, and I just said, yeah, my friend got married to a Christian woman, Catholic, yes. And he says, I knew where he was getting this. So this brother asked me, right, well, is he Pakistani? I says, yeah, why? I knew where it's going, right? And then he says, is he Hanafi? Just thinking, look, man, you know, if he would have thought of this sort of stuff before, right? You know, wanting to marry a Christian girl if he was Hanafi or whatever. Anyway, I says, yeah, why? And he goes, astaghfirullah, I think it's makruh tahrimi in his madhab. This is my response. I said, Allah says it's halal and you're telling me the madhab says it's makruh tahrimi. And it really stuck, you know, in his head in that sense. So there is that type of attitude towards, you know, people will stick with certain biases. It takes some courage. That's what I'd say, you know, in that sense. I mean, it should be a, you know, a no-brainer, right? You follow what's in Allah's kalam. But that's short for the first question. Second question was, it was the whole La nikah illa bi wali thing. Now, first of all, the hadith itself actually, you know, despite the fiqh of the hadith and everything else, right, it contradicts that idea of agency for a woman. And the fact that there are fuqaha who reject it as well. Why do they reject it? Based on the Quran, right? That's why they reject it. It's something that the thing is, every single hadith tradition is actually rejected and accepted. So, and that's why many of the scholars actually said, kullun yuqad minhu wa yuraddu alayhi, everyone except the Prophet. Now that's theoretical. Illa sahib hadha al-qabr. This is Imam Malik saying this, except for the Prophet. Everyone's statement is taken into consideration or rejected. But the thing is, the Prophet's statement is conveyed by everybody else. And because the conveyors can be accepted or rejected, this is just one way of dealing with this type of dichotomy, if you like. I don't know if that answers the question, but it is valid. Look, what you're raising, and yes, there will be these biases, right? Even gender-based biases. Look, there's certain things Aisha said, which clearly is gender-related, where she says, "Ashabbahtumuna bil kilab" to Abu Huraira. Are you comparing us to dogs? Now, the fact that she's saying us, she means women. Right? This is what he was doing, right? You know, and some other things as well. She interpreted it like that, and it's fair to say that that's, at least it shows a chronicling of those type of gender dynamics in the early tradition. Look, you know, she was a warrior. She fought, yep, and you know, challenged men as well. And the hadith traditions, she actually, many of the hadith terms that we understand now, the jarhan ta'dili terms, ta'an fil rawi, are from her. Kadabat fulan, right? Wahama fulan. All these terms that we now understand in hadith terminology comes from her, and it's against other you know, companions at the time. Obviously, people interpret these things away as well. But if we take it literally, well, it's the same stuff as you would use when you're rejecting a hadith.
Hello, my name is Imran. Brilliant lectures. A lot of informations, I guess I have to process. But at the very beginning, you highlighted the debate between akal and nakal. I mean, these are the constant debates within the Islamic traditions, and it's actually manifested in all kinds of fields and all kind of fields and basically traditions, traditional categories in Islamic traditions. Now, you mentioned as well that the debates, especially when it comes to like rational, it's appealing to a certain contemplations of common sense. Now, not as a postmodern, but as a post-structuralist, within the post-structuralist debate, common sense often being treated as something to be suspicious of, because it's oftenly changing. And again, even during the times of the prophets up to now, common sense are always something to be treated with skepticism. Given that situations, I mean, when you talk about common sense and appealing to rationality, do Islamic traditions have like a certain claim of base to what exactly is the base for the common sense? As, for example, in the context of the modernist today, the claim is the Maqasid Sharia. That's basically the kind of a base for the Islamic projects where we can actually fall upon, regardless of all the ijtihad is. Now, the problem with Maqasid Sharia is that it's making a universalist claim. Ontologically speaking, whether it's valid or not is another question. But second, I think it's also broad enough that it can accommodate all kinds of interpretations, including the extremist or the conservative ones that are problematic as well. For example, I mean, Islam speaks about mercies and trying to take care of the self. But again, if you talk to those right-wing Islamists in Malaysia, it's a politics of care. You know, I punish you because I care about you. So that kind of politics of care that Foucault talked about as well. So yes, they're going to use the same reason, the same excuses, care. So I guess my question is to look at that kind of foundations of common sense itself, and how do we what are the bases that we can depart from to contemplate about these kind of issues, especially with regards to Islamic ethics. And maybe another example is a book by Jonathan C. Brown, the latest one on Islam and slavery, where he spoke about how slaveries are being debated within Islamic traditions and so on and so on. But one of the main conclusions that he draws from that book is that the idea of common sense itself within Islamic traditions is never ever being formulated as a universalist thing. Is that a good thing, or do we need a project that, or should we concur to a modernist project that we should have a proper, concrete-based, or essential base that we should depart from when it comes to contemplating Islamic ethics? Or we should really allow that kind of fluctuations and endorse a bit more anti-foundationalist ideas of a common sense or how we approach Islamic ethics? Thank you.
Adding common sense, look, the subjective nature is working. I think is right. The subjective nature of common sense is one that the Sharia has spoken of. And it's not always reliable knowledge. So urf is part of urf, right? So even akal is part of zan in its broadest sense. It's never really claiming absolute certainty, and generally people have been comfortable with that, right? And in terms of since the fact that we've been, I mean, you use the word pro-structuralist, and right from the beginning, you can say a lot of this stuff was anti-foundational. You know, the way how the Islamic knowledge was produced, right? None of it has been sanctioned by one authority or another. And even the ijma really facilitated certain trends, but absolute conclusive judgments. You can really count a lot of those judgments quite easily. In terms of does it need to be codified? Well, if a fatwa can change according to time and space, clearly common sense can. And I mentioned earlier on about look, for centuries the Muslims were comfortable with the geocentric worldview. The earth is at the center of the solar system. It has to be. Why? Because the Prophet is the greatest Prophet ever. Where does this come from? It comes from the Christians, right? Jesus is, the Son of God is, the best of creation as well. And he steps on this earth. This earth has to be somewhere central to the galaxy, and the galaxy has to be somewhere central to the, this is the anthropic principle. Ashraf al-makhlukat, we are at the center of everything. Some of this was debated even in the early days. Fakhruddin al-Razi said, look, the other verses in the Quran says, look, there's antum ashaddu khalqan am as-sama. Are you bigger than the universe itself, you human beings, right? So, in short, the common sense, look, is speculative knowledge. It's not necessarily unreliable, and people's understandings from generation to generation change. And this is something that the fact that we don't have a church in Islam is indicative of this. Everything here we're debating. Look, I could argue for something and you can argue against it. You said modernism. The problem is, look, you said you're postmodern. Well, if modernism isn't working, it's not really going to be a solution for us. And postmodernism is quite comfortable with, in fact, even Foucault was very comfortable with the madness of Islam, insofar as the chaos, right? Because that's the whole reason what modernism comes out of the project of the European experience of Christianity, right? The totalitarian nature of the church itself. That's the response. Modernism is a response to that. Look, this is one of the failures of communism. Why is communism really not taken place in the Muslim world as such? Is because of the fact that it was an antidote to a problem of religion. But, you know, is Islam or even Hinduism the same as that, you know, Western Christianity? Look, Eastern Christianity probably wasn't the same. So I think that's what we need to really look at. And common sense is just like ilham, intuition, ليس الكشف في إثبات العلم من شيء, right? Intuition doesn't guarantee knowledge. If Sheikh Saab just suddenly decided Asr Namaz has just set in now without actually looking at the sun or anything else, you can't just take that person's word for it. So likewise with common knowledge, right? I mean, even fatwas we can reject, right? Common knowledge is even easier to reject. So that's all I can say about that.
Hello, hi. I Asri Yusuf from Gerak Budaya. I just one question. When we talk about ijtihad, do you think in the end there will be a limit? That means we cannot make a new ijtihad in certain issue. Like limit that we heard always is only mujtahid can make a new ijtihad. Or also you can be a lesbian, but you need to ask forgiveness to Allah. So is it we have a limit? Do you think so?
There is no limit to ijtihad. The point is that are those ijtihads going to be valid? So the validation of knowledge, look, that's always going to be there. Look, people gave fatwas and they said, look, we reject this fatwa. Yeah? And a fatwa is an ijtihad. So there are no limits in that sense. So you mentioned that example, you know, is many other examples of fatwas in our times as well. People won't accept. But there's nothing stopping them from making those fatwas. Look, earlier on someone mentioned the extremism stuff, right? There's people making all sorts of fatwas. Look, a lot of this stuff isn't just politics for the sake of it. They are giving fatwas. Yep. I mean, the question that you asked is the fact that there's no body that can prevent someone from actually producing ijtihad of that sort is indicative of this. The interest fatwas, you know, Fazlur Rahman in the 60s was already arguing about the way how he looked at banking. Then people were uncomfortable with what he said. But look, a lot of them are coming around to these things now, right? On the questions of obviously sexuality, identity, and all these sort of things. Consensus and other issues that are people thinking about now. In the future, they might think of these things differently. It doesn't necessarily mean that it'll be correct, but it's like all fatwas, right? Al-ijtihadu la yankudu bimithli. One ijtihad won't another ijtihad. But, you know, you can obviously have your objections to an ijtihad, and that's really the way to deal with a lot of this in our societies now and our times. That's how I'd answer that question.
Rahmanirrahim, I'm Sakina. So I have two questions. The first question is about if in Quran we have Asbabul Nuzul as the study of the context for the one verse. So is that the same for the hadith? Is it in the critics of Matan? And the second question is about the four school of thoughts that you have present, the Nur, Salafiyah and all. Are they geographically mapped so that we know what are the factors that influence one community to accept to adopt one approach or one school of thought in their study of hadith? That's all.
The first one you said was the Quran verses. There are many asbab al-nuzul, right? Asbab al-nuzul itself can be problematic. Not every verse of the Quran necessarily has a justification of revelation in that sense, or cause of revelation. The whole is obviously a cause from Allah. Allah is Musabbib al-Asbab, He's the causer of all causes. An example of that is the Ifk story against Aisha, the false accusation. In the Quran, so many Sunnis will say, look, the Quran says, the verses are related in relation to Aisha. In the Shia tradition, they say, no, this is Maria al-Qubtiyah, right, the other wife of the Prophet. So sometimes asbab al-nuzul are not covered. Look, we'll say, there's a reason for Surah Al-Ikhlas. One of the arguments is that is in response to the mushrikun, right? That's why it's lam yalid wa lam yulad wa lam yakun lahu kufuwan. It's about the daughters of the angels are the daughters of God. The other is, which is also equally plausible, the other asbab al-nuzul is against the Yahud. Why? Because Qul huwallahu ahad rather than wahid is because in Hebrew Elohim is echad, right? One. So that's that. Do we have something similar in hadith? Yes, it's called asbab al-wurud, asbab wurud al-hadith al-sharif. Ibn Hamza did some book on this. It gets a bit difficult because everybody claims every hadith has got a sabab al-wurud, right? And it goes to the next question you asked was the madhab stuff. And what was that? You said, what are the reasons for, if you like, the dominance of madhabs in certain regions? Well, the politics of the day play a part. Money plays a part as well, who finances as well. And also who has the authority, right? So the Hanbali school is actually the smallest of the Sunni ones especially. Geographically, where are they? I mean, Egypt is one of the anomalies in that sense that all those madhabs were there, traditionally. You can argue, okay, the Hanafi madhabs were in the Ajam places. Before this, the archipelago accepted Islam. It was basically Farsi ban places, right? So including India was Farsi speaking in those days, really even up to 1920s. So what you had was the Hanafi lands were Turkic, Persian speaking lands. The Malikis largely, Sahara. The Shafis, Egypt and Yemen and other parts as well. The Malikis, North Africa and elsewhere. And the Hanbalis were in Egypt, some were in Syria traditionally, and then obviously the re-emergence in the Najd really came about. Before Haram Sharif, all four madhabs were there. It's a bit difficult to say, look, this is how, the demographics, that's how it was. But then look, India largely was Hanafi, north. But the south, Kerala is Shafi. And then it's the link with this archipelago, right, the Shafi school. And then the ulama of this region were linked with the ulama of Yemen because of the fishing routes and all this also. That's generally the case. What other things that are represented? Well, Abu Hanifa was a non-Arab, and it was comfortable for the non-Arabs to follow that madhab. Malik and others, look, the Arab tradition, Arabic, it made it a lot easier. The African customs closer to the Arabs, right? So there's this. That's in short how I can explain this.
Hello, I'm Noor.
Hi.
Thank you very much for such a comprehensive lectures. I was just trying to reflect back on your previous lecture on this, and since my area is not theology or philosophy or Islamic studies, I'm a political scientist. I was just thinking that on the basis of all these principles of ijtihad, which you have mentioned, this is so rich in theory, everything is available. And we agree that Islam is reformable, and we need to rediscover Islamic way of thinking or of ijtihad. But do you think there is a problem of free thinking unless that is available? Of course, that varies to the country and society to society. But what is the problem in your view that we don't see these ijtihad or reform as such in a Muslim society, that we should, first of all, we should feel ourselves as a part of the same world? And secondly, of course, 21st century is also demanding to keep ourselves abreast of the new knowledge. And what is the real problem, do you think, that we are going through despite all this rich theoretical knowledge is available? As you mentioned that we have a thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, but we don't see, for instance, in Pakistan, we have Islamic Ideological Council, which is just an advisory board. We don't see to whom we should look up to for the reforms that really they should come up, particularly in the deep divided societies like Pakistan or many others. Thank you.
Response to that, first of all, you mentioned the OIC. They were actually pioneers back in the 1950s and 60s, way ahead of their times. I mean, even some of the things that we're talking now, Fazlur Rahman and others, I believe it was Ayub Khan that put, what's his name? Fazlur Rahman in charge of, is it HAC in our times now? I think it's the HAC now in Pakistan. The politics of the day is what really curtailed a lot of our aspirations and our ambitions as a community. In terms of looking up elsewhere, what's the key problem? Look, we're still really dealing with the trauma of colonialism in that sense, and racism, international racism in that sense, right? We've internalized a lot of racism as well, so we are quite defeatist. We think we can't get out of this mess. A lot of this stuff is theoretical, yes. And you know, political scientists, sociologists, and activists look is how you can actually use this type of knowledge. And remember, you can reject this. At the end of the day, it's theoretical. I'm quite comfortable with this sort of stuff. Education, look, is the key thing. I went to Bangladesh about 2 weeks ago, and I noticed the difference from 20 years ago. The level of literacy as well, and how people respond to each other compared to what I saw before. And look, that's the same. A month ago I was in Pakistan, and that was the case there as well. I've seen, look, there's a lot of change, and I think, look, it's incremental, a lot of this stuff. In terms of sometimes you have to travel around to see how your situation has improved. I mean, in England, we're actually worse off in at least without the violence, sectarianism, than probably is in Pakistan. I saw some of the mullahs there are a lot more, at least they know diplomacy amongst each other than we see in the United Kingdom. So there is that as well, right? So we should try to be positive and look at the fact that, look, we've made progress over the years as well. And look, in such a short time, this country, what is it, 1957? Look how quickly, right? You know, people want to use India as an example, but look, you know, Malaysia, 57, and where you are now. Some of the other countries have been, like Turkey, it's very difficult in Turkey. So look, some of the things, when I was in Pakistan, I spoke about Islamophobia, and in Bangladesh, both places is quite interesting that I thought the topic of Islamophobia wasn't relevant because of the fact that I'm talking about largely the West, and even New Zealand as well. That's the West as well, isn't it? It's not really the global South, right? So I thought they wouldn't really. They'd just say, "Oh yeah, look, we feel sorry for you guys who are living in the West," and they actually said, "Look, well, we understand Islamophobia in Pakistan and in Bangladesh and obviously in Turkey as well. Especially, look, women wearing the hijab. That's the way they're seeing it, as internalized racism on themselves. So that's something. But I think, look, the OIC and other institutions as well. Sorry, did you mention the OIC or the Council of Islamic Ideology? Is that the one you mentioned? Yeah. Yeah. But the OIC aside, I mean, look, sometimes the names as well, they have to change over the years. Now it's called Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Before it was the International Conference or Islamic Conference or something. So that's the case. Look, we'll have to juggle with the reality of names as well. But the CII, I think, Council of Islamic Ideology, they were quite forward-thinking. And look, a lot of it is economics as well, right? When you're, look, power, politics of the day, and money as well, so authority. Sometimes, look, providence is needed in that sense, right? You need, look, people don't invest in Islamic, I'm not saying Islamic studies in general, but Islamic concerns as much. So there is that. The fact that we're probably in this country and not in some other country is because of the wealth here, right? I don't know if that answers your question, but it's a good observation what you noticed.
Just not a question, but a kind of a response. That's something I think you can help me out, because I think this is something that's bothering me for quite a while already. Of course, I mean, within the Islamic traditions, I mean, this whole projects of reform, one of the maxims that is quite appealing, that is that things changes according to context and time, then therefore our fiqh, our understandings of Islam, our understanding of what Islam's vis-a-vis to the society changes in a way. And this sounds good in theory, but it somehow prompts another questions, that when things are changing, first, I think my suspicion is always who dictated the changes, and who dictated the discourse of changes, what the changes represent itself, and how does Islam kind of accommodate these kind of things. And I'll give you one more concrete example. 2 years ago, I've met Shihab, this one renowned scholars in Indonesia. We have a discussions about hijab, and he is of the opinion that hijab is not compulsory, which is, I mean, it's interesting opinions in the Islamic traditions anyway. But part of his argument is that not just within the text and all, but it's, I mean, the ethics of clothing is based on decency. I mean, it depends on the context itself, like what's considered decent in that given society. Therefore, one should actually follow that kind of outlines, if you like. So in the modern time, especially in Malaysia or Indonesia, according to him, wearing hijab is actually not necessarily considered the levels of decency. I mean, you can take off your hijab and still consider decent in that given society. Now that's interesting and that's good and all, but then I reverse the questions. Like, I ask, what if, in the context of, for example, in Afghanistan, the context, the definition of decency is like, you have to wear everything, you have to cover everything. And he said this, if that's the case, that means it's compulsory for them to wear that way. Which is something that is quite troubling. Yet I can understand the logic, because again, it's a matter of security and all, because if you don't wear that way and then somebody might threaten your life and there's a maqasid there, blah, blah, blah. But here it sounds very adaptive and not transformative, especially the kind of a systemic problem that's going on as well. And that leads me to the second part of the things that I've been thinking about, is the project of maqasid that I mentioned. And I think you might want to, I'm sure you're going to mention it later in the next session because of the reform project in the contemporary times. But what makes maqasid project is appealing, because they have this somewhat very vague directions of what the society should be. While that is appealing, it has a problem itself to me, because it's too vague, and it's akin to something that I think affected the problems of political philosophy in general, for example. Because political philosophy talk about justice in a very ideal normative sense, but then it's somehow detached from the very systemic, real concrete problems in the today's society. And that, I think, Maqasid Sharia has suffered that kind of problems as well. Because they talk about justice, life, but what does it really means, really, when it comes to translating those in a concrete situations in a way. To summarize it, I guess, given all these traditions that we have, and I think it's somewhat good to, I don't know whether to end it in this note, is to give us a glimpse of the next, where are we heading given this kind of situation that we are living in. Given that these are the problems that they are struggling with back in the past, for us to move forward within the reform project, what needs to be detached and abandoned, and what new things that we can bring.
So first, on your conversation about the hijab stuff, I'd actually leave it to the sisters to speak about this. Right, I'm not qualified. I don't think my opinion really counts as such. Right, it is something which concerns women, and that's not just escaping the question as such. Right, it's a case of, look, a situation. At the end of the day, any country, right? Sometimes it's political as well. Right, what women can and can't wear and the rest of it. The second thing, what you mentioned about what can I pontificate? Look, I'm going to use that famous quote of Chairman Mao. At the moment there's chaos. Situation is excellent, right? That's all I can say, right? So, anything goes in that sense, right? Really, we should be proud of our tradition as well. Look, there's challenges, yes. We are self-critical. Look, it's part of our tradition, muhasabah, all this sort of stuff. But it's not one that, I mean, there were situations worse yesterday. Look, the invasion of the Mongols, yes, look, that was terrifying times. Then obviously colonialism was one again that was stressed. We in short, I think we need confidence again. That's the key thing. Look, we have to believe in ourselves. Until we can believe in ourselves, everything else becomes a lot more difficult, right? And that's in the Quran, la tahinu wa la tahzanu, don't feel weak and don't be depressed as such. And it's one very much, look, as a liberation theologian, all of you should attempt that sort of stuff. And it's what Iqbal calls the khudi, the self itself. What does he say? Khudi ka karitna buland, right? That, embolden the self. That even God himself would ask you, my servant, what's your command? Right? And until we have that, I think the challenges are still going to be there. But look, what is life without challenge? That's the way I look at it. And going back to that, enjoy the struggle.
I am Adi, I am from Indonesia. So basically, it's very interesting for me because talking about Reformation, about Reformist. So I live with the family in Malaysia. It's very strong. It's very fundamentalist Islam because it's from past. Past is a very strongest party, very Islamic party. So I'm ever talking with my new family in Malaysia about the Reformation Islam, and he asked me, and he said about, oh my God, is the from Zionist, he said, Zionist project. So the good thing, the interesting thing is my new family ever said like this: if you want doing Reformation in Islam, you need to use the tafakkur. Tafakkur it means reflection with fear. But sometimes I feel when he doing tafakkur, he not balance between the reflection and fear. So he too much fear, but reflection, no reflection, only fear. So I just want your comment about what is definition is tafakkur, because my new family is talking about tafakkur, but always fear, and always talking about going to heaven. Yeah, because basically I'm already boring about the going to heaven and hell. Yeah. So the last time I ever get the problem in the past summit, because I'm asking like that. First thing, I am very boring with the heaven and hell because I don't care. So I'm done. So people think I am atheist. So but I'm not atheist, because for me it look like Reformation is not sin. But I don't know why people see Reformation is look like sin. So I asked to I give opinion to this guy in the forum, like, even though I don't care if I cannot entering heaven from door, I can enter heaven from the window, or maybe from the back door. And this is a big debate. Listen, but I believe it look like because I feel if the jihadists brave for the suicidal bomb, so I also must brave for the doing some like that, because yeah, it look like okay. now yeah, it's like thank you.
If you manage to squeeze in the window, just make sure you drag me along with you. Right. So the thing is, look, I mentioned earlier on, Rabi al-Adawiya said what you more or less said. So I don't think he's atheistic, right? Sometimes, look, do you really need reward and punishment? These things are there in the Quran. For it appeal to some people, it won't appeal to others. Now, I'm just trying to think how to respond to what you said, right? Honestly, that's you've given me hope. How's that? You don't care about hope or fear, right? But you've given me hope. The thing about instilling fear, look, people have got different approaches and things that stimulate them in different ways, and it's fine. I think the way how you are approaching it is idiosyncratic, but it's your way, and I think most of us like your honesty in this as well, right? A lot of people will be too scared to say this sort of stuff, right? But well done, right? Bravo to you. Sorry, something you said about the Zionists, I didn't understand that. Right? Why is everything's a Zionist conspiracy or something, right? Heaven and hell now is a Zionist conspiracy as well, right?